Hello everybody and welcome to this webinar regarding Google Drive permissions, hosted by Refractive in conjunction with G Suite Tips. My name is Sean Power and I'll be your host today. Just bear with me 1 second. Good. What we'll be covering today, this is the agenda for the session. We'll discuss the options available for sharing documents in Google Drive. We'll also have a look at what is the best practice and some of the things that can go wrong when sharing documents through Google Drive. We'll then spend some time giving an overview of a tool that we have called Drive Permissions Tool, which is a G Suite Tips promoted tool. And it helps manage these permissions, the sharing permissions from Google Drive. So it's a very effective tool. We'll also see how that can affect how you manage your sharing rights for Google Drive, and also we'll have a special offer for attendees of today's webinar. So you can ask any questions that you have throughout the session. On the YouTube page, there is a chat box in the upper right-hand corner on the right-hand side of the YouTube page. Any we can't answer because of time, we will come back to after the session and answer individually. We've got scheduled 30 minutes for today's session. The material itself shouldn't take anywhere near that. I think it's about 15 or 20 minutes to walk through some of the content. So we'll have time for any questions. So feel free to ask them, and we'll cover those that we can straight away. And as I said, if there's anything that we need to come back to, we'll do that after the session. So very good. We'll begin. So sharing assets from Google Drive can be a wonderful experience. And those of you who've used Google Drive for some time, you know that when it first started, it was a breath of fresh air within the content and office productivity tool market. It's got the ability to collaborate with other users, both inside and outside the organization. And this means that more people can be involved in these decisions that are based around the document content without compromising either the quality of delivery or its speed. There are times, however, when it's not always easy to ensure that documents are shared in the correct manner. So let's walk through how this typically works. It all really starts with a share button. And from this share button, you can add individuals into the document and give them either edit, comment, or view only rights, as you can see in the slide deck here. Collaborators can have different access rights depending on how they will be interacting with the document, and also sharing best practice would dictate that providing editing rights is kept to a minimum of collaborators. And clearly an editor is someone who can change the content on the document. A viewer can only view the content and consume the information. You can also share a document to all users on your domain, which is an interesting tool. And you can even make the documents that you're sharing available publicly. So when sharing publicly, you can allow anyone to access the document, or you can insist that they have a link to the document in order to access it. And those are the top two options on the screen. Many people ask what the difference is between these two options. So basically, sharing a document publicly will enable it to be indexed by search engines, and so may be found by random people. And that's quite useful for documents which are things like press releases, etc., things which are should be made available publicly and anybody can see the information. But not so when it's more private information. And again, we're talking about perhaps by private information and sensitive information, different levels of security required. So sharing with a link means that in order to access the document, the user will need to click a link to the document, and these cannot be indexed by search engines. So that's basically the difference. So neither are particularly secure, as a definite caution is needed when sharing documents in this manner. Neither of these options require sign-in and verification of a Google account, and this is where the anonymous mongoose references arise. You may have noticed if you do share documents publicly where anonymous users can access those documents. So how safe is sharing documents publicly? That's again a question we get asked quite often. So it is possible that a document which is shared publicly will be discovered by randomly guessing the unique document reference. However, this is very unlikely. There are between 44 and 64 characters in this reference, and each has 63 options. Frankly, we tried to work out how many combinations this is and how long it would take to programmatically test each one to find a random publicly shared documents available from a particular domain. But we got up to taking thousands of years and thought, actually, probably it isn't a problem. However, there are other ways in which information contained in these documents can be accessed. We heard of a case recently where a user was reviewing their referrers information to their website and saw a link to a Google spreadsheet. And clicking on that link revealed that the doc was shared to anyone with the link, and they could not only access the sheet, but actually had edit rights to it. So it was shared publicly, anybody with a link with edit rights. It wasn't particularly sensitive information, but the principle remains. Use public sharing with or without a link very carefully. And we'll see later a way in which you can check which documents have been shared in this manner across all your users on your domain. And again, sharing any sensitive information publicly is not a good idea and will no doubt contravene some security policies which you may have in place. So again, back to sharing. So when sharing to individuals or on the domain, anyone whom you provide edit rights to can add new users. They can make copies of the document and download it if they wish. Again, as you can see on screen. Now, you can actually prevent this from happening when sharing with comment or view rights by checking these buttons in the share dialog box. So you can't do this for editors, but you can if you just share anybody who can give viewing rights to, and anybody with comment rights only. And also remember that you can provide access to viewers and commenters for a specific period of time only. So it's really useful for documents which have a limited shelf life. And this doesn't work for publicly shared documents or users with edit rights, unfortunately, but they will always be available. So again, extra vigilance is required. As a user, you can check which documents you own that have been shared by using this search term in Drive, as you can see on screen. By the way, we'll share the recording of the session, so you'll be able to take notes of this if you need to. And this gives you a view of which documents you have shared to others, but not who to, unfortunately. So unless you go into each document and check its sharing settings, you won't be able to see that which documents have been shared to which accounts. And unfortunately, it's probably too difficult to do for an individual document to actually check document by document. Now, we do have the option here of, as I said, we'll come to our Google Drive permissions tool, which actually does that for you, but we'll get to that later. So finally, remember that there are controls available in the admin panel to prevent external sharing for particular groups of users on your domain. And this allows you to ensure that only specific people, those users that you actually want to be able to share outside your domain, can do so. And from an administration perspective, it's just based on organizational units within the Google admin panel. So speak to your administrator if you need to. Okay, so talking about team drives. So looking at some ways in which we can improve the way that we actually share documents. So talking about best practices now. And Team Drives is one way to do this. It's available with G Suite Business, the Enterprise version 2, and also the Education editions. And basically it provides centralized ownership of documents. So instead of me as an individual owning a document, I effectively donate it to the team drive, and it inherits the team drive sharing permissions. So this alleviates the concern over sharing rights on individual documents, and instead allows you to set permissions once for all documents contained in that team drive. If your organization does not have access to team drives, then using drive folders is still a good way to control sharing of documents. Set the permissions once at a folder level, and any document added to the drive folder will inherit the sharing permissions, which is really useful. Sharing documents and folders to individual users is actually quite dangerous, and it's fraught with danger. You can share a document with John in HR, but he leaves that department and joins finance. Any documents which are HR related, which have been shared to John in the past, as an individual, will continue to be shared with him, even if it contains sensitive HR information which John is now no longer used to or should have access to. If the folder was shared with a HR group rather than John individually, then John will be removed from that group and therefore no longer have access to the HR documents. So consider using groups whenever possible. And we saw on the previous slide that sharing folders and documents to viewers and commenters can be time controlled to cease access after a specific period of time, which can be very, very useful depending on the nature of the document. And then finally, as we said before, please avoid, wherever possible, public shares because they are very dangerous. So all sounds great. It's a really good way for us to be able to collaborate with users inside and outside the organization. But what can go wrong with sharing documents? Well, essentially it falls into two main categories. The first is that you are sharing documents appropriately at this point in time, but those rights and those sharing needs change over time. And the ability for your collaborators to share your information with your contacts can also have a detrimental effect to your document security. If you share a document with a user today for a perfectly good and valid reason, they may no longer need or be suitable for access to that document tomorrow. Things change over time, but document sharing does not necessarily follow these changes. And we've all had cases where we shared information with users, and though the requirements have changed, but those users have still retained access to those documents. And in addition to this, the second point on here is that you may be absolutely regimented and work to best practice in your document sharing, or even your organization's document sharing. But what about those you provide editing access to? For example, if they move the document into a folder on their drive, that document inherits the sharing permission of that folder. So the asset could leak to a contact of theirs who should not have access to that document. And you, the owner of the document, loses control of the information. And that potentially creates serious data breaches. And every week we hear about another data breach where hackers have exposed another customer database. The threat also applies to files like spreadsheets, where one of your staff could accidentally or maliciously expose personal data on your customers, students, or staff, or anybody else. And particularly relevant for organizations in Europe, with the onset of GDPR, this can have huge ramifications. We've got fines of up to 20 million euros or 4% of global turnover. And we've also introduced the option for class action lawsuits for situations where there are breaches. So the potential for consequences for data losses is huge. And even outside of GDPR, the brand damage and loss of confidence in customers when breaches occur can have devastating effects. Now, these two issues do not surface immediately and not easy to identify until now, really. The introduction of our Drive Permissions tool helps to alleviate these problems and helps you identify where potential breaches have occurred. So we'll take a look at that now just to give you an overview of what that is. The Drive Permissions tool can help you manage the sharing of documents, both internally and externally. It basically checks all documents owned by all users on your domain and identifies who has access to those documents. Again, this is both inside and outside your organization. It also highlights all documents which are shared publicly and those which are shared with groups of users. So again, it covers all bases in terms of all documents which are shared, however they are shared. And then finally, to just close that loop off, it provides the option to affect a change on those document sharing rights to cease their access. So administrators may decide that sharing of all documents to all users on a particular domain may be stopped immediately. And this quite often occurs when your organization stops trading with a particular company or changes to a different external partner to provide another outsourced service. And that works really well. So basically anybody on that domain, all documents shared to them can be seized. But it also allows administrators to pinpoint individual documents, look at who they are shared with, and they can identify whether that's a valid share or not and make a change if not. So this gives administrators a great deal of flexibility and control over document sharing, and it helps prevent unwarranted information leaking into the wrong hands, especially for sensitive data and that which is shared outside the organization. The Drive Permissions tool is an excellent way to regularly check that documents shared with internal and external contacts are not leaking sensitive data out of the domain. So let's take a quick look at the pricing for the Drive Permissions tool. Every user on your domain needs to have a Drive Permission license, because basically it looks at all the Drive assets owned by all the users on your domain. Licenses are available on a monthly or annual basis, and you can see that we've got the pricing up there on the screen, and we have special pricing for education and non-profit organizations, as you can see. And we have, as a special incentive for today's webinar, we're offering 2 licenses for the price of 1 for the first 12 months when purchased before the end of next month. And that's a great incentive to make use of the tool sooner rather than later and start safeguarding your documents assets. When you have the Drive Permission licenses, you can basically run a check anytime you want, as many times as you want, for either all users or for individual users, depending on the situation. So it gives you a great deal of confidence in how documents are being shared within your domain. You can find out more information about the Drive Permission tool by visiting the link shown on this on the screen. And as I said, we'll share this recording with you, and the links, so you'll be able to access that. Just complete the form on the page to register your interest, and someone from our sales team will be in contact with you to talk you through the options. And we would appreciate if you added in the approximate number of users you have and your location in the comment box, just so we can deal with your inquiry appropriately. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a good idea of what Drive Permissions can do for your organization. I don't think we've got many specific questions in the YouTube channel. So anything that do come, if there are any questions, please just respond to the email that we'll send you either later today or tomorrow morning. And then we will come back to those and we'll happily answer any questions that you may have. Okay, so I thank you for your time. Hopefully that's answered everything that you want to, and it's well worth having a look at the Drive Permissions tool. And again, if you've got any questions of how to effectively share information from Google Drive, then we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. Okay, thank you very much.